Welcome, everybody. Please take your seats so we can get going. This is going to be a very exciting program. I know a lot of people have been looking forward to this for some time. I'm delighted to welcome Diana Matut, who was a YIVO fellow and is a PhD in Jewish Studies, a lecturer in Jewish Studies at the University of Halle-Wittenberg. Please come up.
Shalom Aleichem, teure Freund, Choshe Veroilem. Es ist mit größtem Vergnügen, als ich dem Covid zu sein da in YIVO Hand mit euch. Und ich weiß, es ist ein bisschen nudne, aber eider mir heben an, will ich noch sagen, einen schönen Dank alle die Kollegen, Freund, Mechaberinnen und Mechabertes, was ich habe getroffen da. Und zwischen sie speziell ein paar Namen von Menschen, was haben mir geholfen, sehr als Sache. In meiner Forscharbeit und in der Zeit, wo ich bin gewandt. Das ist erstens Mila Scholechova, was ist heint nicht da. Das ist Eddie Portnoy, Alex Weiser, Gunnar Berg und Eleonor Biesonski. Ein schönen Dank euch und euch wollt das alles nicht gewinnen möglich. And now, let us start our journey through Henech Kon land, which I called Beyond the Dybbuk, because most of you might know him first and foremost as the person who composed the score for the most famous Yiddish movie, I guess, of all times, and that is the Dybbuk. So today, let us venture a bit beyond that. And let's start with a quote. I will quote to you in Yiddish, and you can follow in English. Kollegen und Freund, da redt zu euch a Bürger von dem Land Yiddish. A Land ohne Kasermes, ohne Militär. A Land, in welchem der einzige Waffen ist die Pen. Ihr werdet das Land nicht gefunden auf keiner Umweltkarte. Die Grenzen von diesem Land befinden sich bloß in die Regionen von Kulturleistungen und mühevoller künstlerischer Arbeit. Der Bürger von dem Land Yiddish ist der Bürger von der Welt. I never found a quote that encompasses what we understand as secular Yiddish culture better. This is really the perfect manifesto to get us into the world of Henech Kon, the world of secular Yiddish Kate and Yiddish culture before the war. And speaking of culture, literature before the war, of course, there was literature, there was art, but there was also music. And the secular Yiddish world of the time was looking for a composer who could express their needs. And Melech Ravitch, in mein Lexikon, wrote the following. Das erste Mal öfter sind alle jüdische Ewigkeiten ist bewusstsinnig gebaut geworden, a kompletter Binien von geistiger jüdischer Weltlichkeit. Wir haben gebaut a weltliche Schule, a weltlichen Theater, a Presse, a Literatur. Jüdische Malerei und wir haben sich euch vermosten auf dem Gebiet von der weltlichen jüdischer Musik. Und zudem ist mamisch wie geschaffen gewesen unser Henech Kon. There could be no higher praise from someone like Melech Ravitch, who was deeply invested, of course, in Yiddish literary activities before and after the war. But let's turn to Henech Kon himself. This brings us to the towns of Łódź and Kudno. He was born into a Hasidic family, but by the age of 12, his family sent him to his grandfather's house in Kutno because they wanted him to have the best possible Hasidic education, which included going to a yeshiva as well. They had high hopes for him becoming a Rav or something similarly spectacular. Unfortunately, their efforts failed equally spectacularly because he so much fell in love with the klezmorim and with the music that he heard in Kutno that there was no chance of him ever becoming a rabbi. Instead, when he became probably 18 years old, we don't know exactly when, his family allowed him to move to Berlin. Berlin at the time, and especially the Royal Conservatory, the Königliche Musikhochschule, was one of the most important centers for art music of the early 20th century, just as Vienna and other places. And actually Vienna and Berlin at the time, at the beginning of the 20th century, had very close ties in terms of art music. So among the teachers you would find at Berlin, and who probably were Kon's teachers as well, is Max Bruch, who was already quite late by the time Kon got to Berlin, but more importantly, Arnold Schönberg and Franz Schrecker. So the two of them, Schönberg and Schrecker, moved back and forth between Vienna and Berlin, and Kon would have certainly been one of their students when they actually were in Berlin and not in Vienna. And I think until this very day, when you listen to Kon's music, it does not equal Schrecker and it does not equal Schönberg, but if you're well-versed in music of the beginning of the 20th century, you'll hear their compositions reflected in his music as well. So, let us start, or let us go back, it depends on how you want to look at it, to a very Jewish music, to Hasidic music to be precise, and to be more precise, to nigunim, the famous songs without words sang by Hasidim. Nigunim played an important role through Henech Kon's entire career. You can't think Henech Kon without thinking nigunim. And I once gave a lecture and asked someone, could you please sing a nigun for me? And the person started, die, 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 which of course is a nigun from the Dybbuk. And the Dybbuk's nigun, or the so-called Miropole Rebbe's nigun, is an artificial nigun. It was one that Henech Kon composed specifically for the Dybbuk. And to give us a little tam and a little taste of the Dybbuk's wonderful music, I would like to welcome on stage Zalmen Mlotek. I think I don't need to introduce him here. And his mother played a very important role in my research because she was the one who put the boxes with all the Henech Kon material in front of me some 20 years ago. So, Henech Kon's childhood experiences of the Hasidic world stayed with him his entire life in the form of nigunim. And you just heard a certain kind of a nigun that's called the Dybbuk nigun. It's a specific kind of nigun supposed to support the transformation into higher spheres in the Kabbalistic thinking of the Hasidic world. And it's also a nigun sang when the bride is being led around the groom under the chuppah. So very, very consciously chosen and composed by Henech Kon. It's not by chance that he chose this particular kind of nigun for this particular scene in the Dybbuk movie. And again, Melech Ravitch said about Henech Kon, he wrinkles his gaunt forehead and remembers nigunim. He remembers nigunim all the time. And just a few examples. Here you see the Musikalischen Bibliothek, which was published in 1937 in Warsaw. And here you see the Kishev Nigun, or magic melody, again printed 1937 in Warsaw. And it says, von der Kischefmacherin. And we know that Henech Kon was involved in the staging of the Kischefmacherin, so it's entirely possible that this specific nigun was used during the performance of the Kischefmacherin staged in Warsaw. And another beautiful example for his use and composition of nigunim is this edition published in 1945 here in New York, and it contains the beautiful illustrations and paintings of Isaac Lichtenstein and Henech Kon's composed nigunim. But this is not where the relationship between Henech Kon and folk music in a broader sense ends. Just the opposite. Henech Kon's entire work is very much influenced by the music of not only Hasidim and nigunim, but also klezmorim and the Yiddish song of his time. And Yisrael Rabinovich, in his book of Jewish music, wrote about that. Although all the melodies by Kon are of folk style, they are still not mere copies of the traditional, but are distinguished by an unmistakable individuality. Of Henech Kon's music, it may be said that, although written in the style of folk, it is never hackneyed. And I think this is very true. We'll find resemblances, melodies, excerpts of folk melodies, and be it instrumental music or songs, really in almost all of Kon's work, but it is extremely exquisite and masterfully done and masterfully interwoven into his own compositions. Weichert, in his Zechroines, his memoirs, gives a beautiful example. He says, "Another time I met a Jewish wedding party. The klezmorim played quietly bride and bridegroom Mazel Tov, so Chusenkala Mazel Tov. The melody stuck in my head, and many years later, I gave it to the composer Henech Kon and asked him to weave it into the music for my production of Sholem Asch's Kiddush Hashem. I would love to play this to you, but this is one of the many pieces of music that unfortunately is lost unto this day until the YIVO archives might not, reveal them sooner or later, I hope. So now, let us continue with Henech Kon's arrangements and compositions by listening to two songs that very much embody and represent his use of folk music in general. The first song you're going to hear is called Zedos Kleidl Tatishe, words by the famous poet Itzik Manger. And it actually comes from Hotzmach's Techter, which is a play by him based on Avram Goldfarben's Die Kischefmacherin. Very interesting connection here. And you see that here he's using folk melody in a very, like almost one-to-one, but when you listen then to Der Batchen, also based on a poem by Itzik Manger, you'll see here he imitates beautifully, really beautifully and masterfully the singing and the style of Batchanes. You'll hear in the piano sets the stage like the Klasmorim would set a stage for a Batchen, and then you have a Batchen style, a Batchanische Reinführ by the singer. So it's really a very, very beautiful rendering of what people would know and be familiar with through their daily lives and through Jewish culture of their time. So, and now it is my great, great pleasure to not only welcome back on stage Zalmen Mlotek, but also the wonderful Re'ut Ben-Ze'ev from Israel and New York, who is one of the most accomplished singers of early 20th century music. I've heard her performances of while, and I was so fortunate as to listen to a rehearsal this afternoon, and I can only say you are in for a real treat.
Das Kleidl, dat is die samme letzte Mode. A soin vermogt nicht, dat is die Freu von Woje. A soins vermogt nicht, dat is die Freu von Woje. Wie schön, Moletam und Mollechin, in a Kleidl, as a Kleidl, kann man leben, tanzen gehen. Wie schön, Moletam und Mollechin, in a Kleidl, as a Kleidl, kann man leben, tanzen gehen. Ze die Schichlech, dat is von same beste lidele. A so eine Schichlech, dat is hat doch nicht a jede. A so eine Schichlech, dat is hat doch nicht a jeder. Wie schön, Moletam und Mollechin, ja, so eine schöne Schichlech, kann man leben, tanzen gehen. Wie schön, Moletam und Mollechin, ja, so eine schöne Schichlech, kann man leben, tanzen gehen. Dem Chossen, dat is was ich hab bekommen. Wir haben sich beim Fotograf schöner abgenommen. Wir haben sich beim Fotograf schöner abgenommen. Wie schön, Moletam und Mollechin, mit a Chossen, as a Chossen, kann man leben, tanzen gehen. Wie schön, Moletam und Mollechin, mit a Chossen, as a Chossen, kann man leben, tanzen gehen. Wie schön, Moletam und Mollechin, mit a Chossen, as a Chossen, kann man leben, tanzen gehen. Ossen und Kalle, Bechutonim und Freund. Hört, was darschend der Badchen heint. Heint in dem Tag von Glück und von Fried. Zittert der Fiedel und schlippet die Flied. Zittert der Fiedel und schlippet die Flied. Und sitzt da die Kalle, schied wie der Tag. Dor was sagt der Fiedel, sag Fiedle, sag. Die Schenkeit ist schön, nur die Schenkeit vergeht. Also sagt der Fiedel, und was sagt die Flied? Also sagt der Fiedel, und was sagt die Flied? Schoten das Leben, schoten das Glück, schoten vergeht und es kommt nicht zurück. So redet der Badchen und die Tränen sein Blick. Und sitzt da der Chossen in Samet und Seid und die Kohle scheint in der Hube Kleid. Mechutonim und Kist bekommen der Leid. Nur über sie allem es liebet die Flied. Nur über sie allem es liebet die Flied. Betracht nur dem Badchen, was da vor euch steht, und red zu euch kluge und teure Red. Redt und redt, uns begleitet ihm die Flied. Euch der Badchen vergeht. Euch der Badchen vergeht. Schoten das Leben, schoten das Glück, schoten vergeht und es kommt nicht zurück. So redet der Badchen und die Träne in sein Blick. Ja, die Bam, 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 bam. Yadi bye bye yam, yadi bye bye, yadi bye bye, yadi bye, yadi bye, yadi bye bye, yam, yadi bye bye. Yadi bye, yadi bye, yam bye.
The years after his return from Berlin to Warsaw were among the most productive in his life. When he returned to Warsaw, one of his first acquaintances was with Yitzchok Leibush Peretz. And for the few years they had together in Warsaw, Peretz died in 1915, they formed a very intense collaboration and cooperation. So Peretz one day said to Kon, "Ob du wirst es nicht machen, wird es keiner nicht machen. If you are not going to do it, no one is going to do it." So this is how far Peretz trusted Kon with the music of the secular Yiddish world of the beginning of the 20th century. So Kon, in the course of the few years until Peretz's death, wrote several stage songs and music for Peretz theater plays. Among them, Bei Nacht auf den alten Mark. One of the most successful cooperations in his life, however, was with Moshe Broderson. So Moshe Broderson was called the musical poet, and Henech Kon was called the poetical musician. And there is nothing the two of them couldn't do. It's just unbelievable what in the course of a mere 20 years the two of them built in Warsaw, in Łódź, and in several places in Poland and Europe. Just to give you a rough idea, in the course of the cooperation, they founded at least 4 different ensembles that were extremely successful and made the bulk of what we consider the Yiddish theater of the beginning of the 20th century: Azazel, Ararat, Chad Gadye, Jungtheater, and so on and so forth, among them the first puppet or marionette theater in Yiddish in Europe. So Melech Ravitch again, who is a brilliant source on Henech Kon, he writes, "And as soon as young Yiddish started in Łódź and later the Chaliastre in Warsaw, and composers and musicians were needed everywhere, Henech Kon took this role upon himself out of love. In this field, he had almost no rivals, and maybe he was truly unrivaled. And because Henech Kon had Yiddish as a base, he had a Yiddish style as well. And he was drawn to Moshe Broderson, the musical poet." And here you see that's actually the first program of Azazel. So for those who are in theater history, this is a most important and fascinating document. Unfortunately, I didn't find it, but Jane Pepler did, who is very much engaged into Yiddish theater music and the performance of Yiddish theater music. And she put it recently online, and it says, pretty beautiful, Programm Nummer 1, and Erster Jiddischer Miniaturtheater Azazel. So that's the miniature theater, the puppet theater, Azazel. And if you look at their first program, it's really fantastic what they put together. It's really a revue of the finest sort, finest kind. With the people who are playing and acting here, it's partly like the who is who of Yiddish theater, and music written by Henech Kon time and again, and also the very famous Azazel Shimmy was part of this entire first program of Azazel. To give you an idea of what the music of this kleynkunst, so small cabaret, small theater performances was like, I'm just going to play for you a tiny little bit of a typical song from the Warsaw Theater. It was recorded in 1928. The lyrics are by Broderson, and it's recorded with orchestra. And you're going to hear Ola Lilith and Władysław Godik. They were a couple, they were married, and performed a lot in Warsaw in those years. And yeah, just like a minute or so. And this is really a very beautiful and funny piece about an Eitzel, so a little advice about whom to marry. So he is unsure, should he take a wife from Poland or from Galicia or from Lithuania? And of course, then the pros and cons are discussed, and not very much to the advantage of the several nationalities, so to say.
A bucher in die Jugend, noch a Jung, bin ich umgefuhr. Ich bin a Bucher, ein.
Wenn an Nächste geben, dir an Nächste, wenn ich geben, nimm a weibliche Bucher, wenn ihr wollt ich leben.
Mit deiner Kasene, ein. Nehmen sich a Fäulische, mit nicht ständig Dadeln, ganze Tätsche Brassenen, in Ochsem sich der Madele. Aber ich war Fäulische, ja, ma.
Seid ihr nicht gar Fäulische, schlippen mit den Glieben, die Weiber lacht die Fäulische, sie sind alle Drücken.
Aber ich war Driebkele, ja, ma. Nehmen a Galicische, ist mir doch der Binder, die Menschen zu mit Jachtenen, wie die Doktor lacht die Brüder. A Galicianer,
Okay, that gives you a nice impression, I think. But now we'll come to, for me, one of the key aspects of Henech Kon's work. And that is that he wrote the first Yiddish opera ever to be produced in Warsaw. There was a Yiddish opera a few years before that premiered in London, but he really brought the concept of Yiddish opera to Europe for the very first time. There was, of course, Yiddish operetta, there was vaudeville, there was all sorts of theater and kind of theater music, but he really produced and wrote the first Yiddish opera. And thanks to the Yale University Library, you can download the score for free. It's online available, and you find the shelf mark up here. So the opera is called David und Bathsheba, and you see here the beautifully painted title page, and in beautiful calligraphy, Henech Kon, Opera von Henech Kon, written underneath. And just to give you an impression of his really extremely clear and beautiful handwriting, you see here, this is the first page, Erster Akt, and this is the piano score. But, and here's the choir in four-part harmony. He also indicated string instruments, at least a string quartet, but we know that for the performance proper, they did not have string instruments. So this must have been something he envisaged for the opera. In essence, they didn't have enough money to make this a huge production. They put it on in the very, very famous, like the famous Yiddish theater in Warsaw, that's the Kaminsky Theater, and it premiered on May 24, 1924. Libretto by Moshe Broderson under the direction of David Herman. And here you see the ensemble, Rus Leviash, Moshe Rudinov, Shimon Orliuk, and Henech Kon himself. So because they didn't have enough singers, like trained Yiddish art singers at the time, what they needed to do was that Henech Kon would sing as well. So he would play piano and sing the bass line as well. Thank God, at least they had a choir, because otherwise they would have needed to do that themselves as well. And the choir was the famous Warsaw Schnör choir. So, like if you deal with Yiddish theater music of the early 20th century, you'll certainly find the Schnör choir. And here you see a picture. They didn't come, like not all of them showed up for the performance. It was just a small like chamber choir that actually performed the first Yiddish opera. Yes, and before I asked our two wonderful musicians on stage, let me just briefly say or explain to you what we are going to hear. So the story of David and Bathsheba is known to you all. So King David has this relationship with a married woman, and they conceive a child. And of course, you know, one child they had together was, of course, King Solomon. But before that, they had a child who died because of the sin in which he was conceived. So the scene that you're going to hear now or listen to now is the following. The prophet has chastised Solomon, and Solomon has accepted God's punishment and said, okay, God, you're punishing me. And so the child dies. And what you're going to hear now is one of the last scenes of the opera where Bathsheba sits and weeps and mourns the loss of her child. And this is why it's called Bathsheba's Songs, or I call it Bathsheba's Song. So, please. Oh, I'm sorry. So this is a premiere after more than 90 years. you feel about this, but I could actually really listen to the entire opera. I would love to be able to do that one day. Right, so how was the opera received? Actually, there are very different accounts about that, and they differ greatly. Alter Katznisne in the Literarische Blätter wrote, "He, Henech Kon, dared to speak to us in a Yiddish sound language, and here and there, this language reached a great purity of expression." So high praise for a Yiddish sound language that, according to Katznisne, was created in this opera. But let's listen to Melech Ravitch again. And once, around 1925, that's a little error on his site, Henech Kon, Moshe Broderson, and David Herman, the director of the Dybbuk, Moshe Rudnov, the baritone, and Rochel Levias, his wife, the singer, conspired. And they didn't tell anybody for a long time that they were preparing nothing less than a Yiddish opera. And one fine evening, it actually happened at the Kaminsky Theater. And since we had only a few trained singers in Warsaw, the composer himself took on a role, and only then did we become aware of the fact that he had a strong and trained bass voice. It, the opera, didn't last for long. And so by all accounts, and checking all the newspapers that I could find in the aftermath of the premiere, it could not have been on more than 5 nights. So it was not precisely what I would call a blockbuster, or how would you say this? Like a, you know what I mean? Like a, yeah, a Yiddish blockbuster, yes. Vater, the famous Isacher Vater, who wrote Jiddische Musik in Polen zwischen beide Welten gekommen ist und die Geschichte von dem jiddischen Theater in Europa, said about David und Bathsheba, "The enormous project has called forth enthusiasm among the Jews of Warsaw. Every performance was transformed into the celebration of Jewish musical art." It's very interesting, already two kind of different accounts about that. So Ravitch says it didn't last long. The newspapers say 5 days, and Vater then in 1970 says, well, it was actually a huge success. So it's, yeah, you need to figure out what you want to believe. Kon gained fame already abroad before he actually moved to the US. So, for instance, he wrote the music to Der Freylekhe Vagabund, and here, of course, with the famous Yankov Rechtsart, which was staged in San Jose, an operetta in 3 acts. So here already we see that Kon made a name for himself outside of Europe pretty early on. He was, by all accounts, not only a brilliant pianist and musician and composer and arranger, but also a music historian. So in the famous Allgemeine Enzyklopädie, the volume Yidden, he wrote a chapter called Yidden in der Musik, so Jews in music. And that was shortly before he emigrated in 1940. And he writes, "The light operetta is almost exclusively in Jewish hands. Oskar Strauss, Kalman, Leo Fall, Paul Abraham, Misha Spoljansky, the 2 Hollanders, Ralph Benatsky, Kurt Weill. More serious Yiddish opera music was written during the last years by Yosef Kaminska, the son of Esther Rochel Kaminska, the music for parrots by Nacht auf den Alten Mark, and the Warsaw performance by David Herman and the Wilna Truppe. And he mentions himself, very modestly, Henech Kon, opera David und Bathsheba, music for Kiddush Hashem, Der Goylem, and the Madam Sanatorium movie Mir Kumen On." So here he lists himself in the illustrious round of names of the great Yiddish operetta and opera composers of the early 20th century. So, and this is also a perfect bridge for me, just very briefly, because we could spend an entire hour on that. Here is a list of the scores Henech Kon wrote. As I said, most of you know him as the composer of the Dybbuk, but actually he already wrote what he said, the music for the Madame Sanatorium movie Mir Kommen On. And that was produced 1936 in Poland, followed by Alchet, also 1936 Poland, Der Dybbuk, 1937, Freylekhe, Kaptsonim, and one movie that he produced also in Poland. This was actually a Czech-Polish cooperation called Border Street, a movie entirely filmed in Polish and with his score filmed in 1948. It's available online if you want to watch it. This is here you find the link on dailymotion.com. 1940 was the year of his migration, forced migration to the US. And he left parts of his family in the ghetto in Wood, among them his mother. And if you open his songs of the ghetto, you'll find that he dedicated a beautiful song to her called Ghetto Wiegenlied, which he dedicated to Sarah Cohn, his mother. But we are going to hear another song from this most beautiful and heartbreaking collection. It's called Lass mir schweigen. It's one of the lesser-known songs by Henech Kon and words by the famous Hirsch Glick.
Weiter schweigen, nicht kein Wort gerät. Ob ihr mit vermachte Augen murmeln a Gebet. Nicht die Psalmen, nicht die Drohten, nicht die Wach, wo's steht. Kehret uns nicht verboten, wenn still erhebt. Unser Teusel immer stille, Windel nicht vermeid. Öfter wirst du unser viele Chor vertragen weit. Soll sich der Windel lang nicht sammeln, dann wirst du das gewiss. Zu mein alter kranker Mamen trag mein Geruss. Zwischen tausender Millionen Augen allerlei wirst mein Mame gleich erkennen in der seinen See. Ihre Augenrock verträrte, stricken sie kein Wind. In Lager, verzerrte, bängt sie nach ihr Kind. Eil sich Windel schnell geflogen, ich mein Gruß ihr schick. Swellen ihre kranke Augen, sehn ihr Kind zurück. Swindel, אפשר weint es, räumt das Sod mir ein. Ich versteh nicht, אפשר meint es, es wird mein Sof du sein. Ich will das Windel etwas fragen, strickt das Herz a Trür. Ist das Windel schnell verflogen und kein Wort nicht mehr. Da lass mir schweigen, weiter schweigen und kein Wort gerät.
Henech Kon's siblings survived the war, and YIVO holds an entire collection of letters that he exchanged with his brother in Paris and with his sister who remained in Poland. His sister tried to leave Poland but didn't have the necessary funds and means to do so. In the years that followed, it was a hard beginning for Kon in New York, as for so many others who had to flee Europe and tried to make a living in the new home. And Vater wrote about this with regard to Kon. Henech Kon was one of the pillars of the Yiddish theater in Poland and for small-scale performance arts in general. But when he came to America, he walked as if on a strange planet. Henech Kon returned to Europe several times after the war. He returned, for instance, to Paris, where he was involved with the Yiddish Kunsttheater, Ikut, and especially with one of its great singers, Sonia Wojtkowska. She used to perform with the KZ Theater and later with the Yiddish Kunsttheater. And they went on tour together, and Kon wrote many songs, especially for Sonia. So they toured Europe. They also went to Germany several times, also to the eastern part, the socialist part of Germany. So he had ties with Europe in the years after the war. During his time in New York, he not only engaged in arranging songs and theater plays, but also very specifically he wrote children's songs and accompanied and arranged children's songs. So this is a book also to be found in the YIVO archives, zijn lieder von Henech Kon voor de Kinderring. And Kinderring, of course, was founded in 1927 by the Arbeiterring, the workmen's circle. So they organized summer camps for kids. And so this is a beautiful songbook with his original songs for the workmen's circle summer camps. And here you see there are two beautiful, beautiful collections of 78 in the YIVO Sound archives. These are always like 3, 4, 5, 78. And here, Henech Kon arranged songs by other composers, but it's entirely devoted to Yiddish children and Yiddish children's songs. And I'm going to play for you a recording of a song you might know, because Chava Alberstein made it really famous and well known, and that's Klingenglocken. And the singer is Isaac Gladstone, and piano Henry Paikin. It was probably recorded in the late 1940s, and it's very different from what you might know.
Klingen Glocken, Bim und Am. In der Seite sind der Socken, Bim und Am. Linke Strahle mir die Fall, Bim und Am. So geht die Bobe, keine Dobe, der ganze Agut Aten hoch Abdule weit abissen Mame morgen weiter Sorgen in der Krumm Dingen Welker, Dingen Glocken
May all kids be raised with such beautiful and advanced music. So another song that you all might know is Yossel Bear. And I want to present this song to you, and we are reaching the end here. First of all, sang by the wonderful Sidor Belarski, or Isidor Lifshitz, a recording from 1955. So let's start with that.
Heiß ich Josselbär und ich dien in Militär, Stiefel trug ich am Mundier, Leavdel wie ein Offizier. Josselbär, gedient in Militär, Josselbär, dient in Militär. Gewinn bin ich a schustri Jung, geleg die Padeschwe mit der Zung. Heint mit a Fix und mit a Schwert, hab ich die Schusterei in Dreht. Josselbär, gedient in Militär, Josselbär, dient in Militär.
Okay, and now just a very brief excursion to show how actually very much up-to-date and loved by a young audience Henech Kon's music can be. So let's listen just briefly to Den Kahn and the Painted Bird performing the same song, something like 60 years later in Berlin.
Zappel, wollt Josselbär! 1, 2, 3, 4. Hij zegt Jos een wereld, 19 in de militair. Ai, 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 ai. Stiefel droog, je gaat monteren, handelen via een officier. Ja, ai, 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 ai. Ik ben ik als zuster jongen, wat podes was met een zon. Ai, 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 ai. Hij doet weer een pik, zo schwer, zuster, hij op in trein. Ja, ai, 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 ai. Ja, super, die dit militair. Ja, zo, ja, zo, ja, super, die dit militair. Ja, super, die dit militair. Ja, zo, ja, zo, ja, super, die dit militair. Yes, my name is Yesselbear, and I serve the military. Steel-toed boots, a uniform, keep this soldier's carcass warm. I used to work in a factory till the army drafted me. Now I work for Army Brass Factory, can kiss my ass. You're so bad, serve the military. Yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, bad, serve the military. You're so bad, serve the military. Yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, bad, serve the military.
Okay. Henech Kon for the 21st century. He continued to publish beautiful compositions of Yiddish poems. This, by the way, is also one of his most beautiful pieces that really should, be a part of stage life again. This is the poetry of Yankov, the famous and wonderful Yankov Gladstein, one of my really favorite poets of the early 20th century. And he, arranged and put it to music with the beautiful drawings of Liechtenstein. In 1955, there was also a show of Herschel Ostropoler with the music by Henech Kon, put on stage by the Jiddischer Nationale Arbeiterverband. So his music, was performed in the US, and it appeared on stage, but of course it was no comparison, at least in his mind, to what he had in the years before he had to leave Europe. And in honor of our guest, Zalmen Mlotek, here a little reference to the Volksbühne. On the 25th of November 1964, Kon put or staged the enchanting melody. And the New York Times wrote on this occasion, it was also the 50th birthday of the Volksbühne, as befits a senior organization of the Yiddish theater in New York, it opened last night with a work based on the characters created in the time of Abram Goldfaden. Its Sigmanger has woven them into a new play with music by Henech Kon. The theme is about people who seek happiness by learning a haunting magic tune that will solve their problems. Some do, some don't. That's life. So this would be a perfect last word, but let us finish with music. So one of the songs that you all might know is Shpil mir a lidele in Yiddish. And this is actually what you could call der Gilgul von den Niggen. But to start and to remind you all of its melody, may I ask our two on stage. So to begin with, you're just going to hear the first verse.
Spiel mir a tango is a Yiddish, soll sein misnagdish oder chsidish, as die bobische allein soll kennen euch verstehen, soll Tage hat Tänzele gehen. Spielt, spielt, klesmerlich spielt, wie a Yiddish Herz begt und fehlt. Klapp, klapp, peukele geschwind, vergessen soll man alles erzählt.
That's only the beginning, because now you have the melody in your head again, and with this melody in your head, please listen now to this recording of a Yizmechu. Okay. Did you notice something? I think you noticed it's actually the same melodic structure. So this is very typical of Kon, what we have here. So it's called the Yizmechu, but actually I found it on a Abe Schwartz and Dave Terrace recording from 1928, and there it's called Dovidel Basetz die Kale. So this is the original writing on the 78th. So this is not so much like a fixed tune, than more an instrumental interlude that you would hear between the songs of the Batchen, the performance of the Batchen during a Kale Basetzen. So this is not so much a proper melody in a proper sense, but more a melodic structure that you would find time and again in the klezmer repertoire of the period. So, and this is what Henech Kon used for the melody of Shpil a lidele in Yiddish. And this is really the last bit for this lecture. I just want to introduce you to the gilgul of this nigunim, because it had several different words and applied to it. So one we heard already now was Shpil tango of Yiddish, and became known under the title also Yiddish tango. Soll sein misnagdisch oder chsidisch, als der Bobischi allein soll können das verstehen und taka a tänzel again. Spiel je mir a tango aus von Pleitim, von dem Volk zu säten und zu spreiten, als Kinder groß und klein sollen können das verstehen und taka a tänzel again. So that's the version of the Kovner Ghetto. And then it says, Spiel, Spiel, klezmer Spiel, wie a Jiddisch Herz hat gefühl. Spiel, Spiel mir a Tänzelois Spiel, spiel ich bettig mit ne Schomme und Gefühl. And so on. Spiel je mir a Tango bloß nicht arisch, soll das sein nicht arisch, nicht barbarisch, als die Soinim sollen sehen, als ich noch tanzen kann und attacke a Tänzele mit rein. So this is the Kovner Ghetto version. And there's also a Soviet Yiddish version, recorded by Cantor Dovid Stiskin in 1968. And there it says, in the refrain, spielt, spielt, klezmerlech spielt, wie nur aber freiter Mensch fehlt, sing mir das flammig größer Lied, wie es singt bloß a sowjetischer Jid. So that's the Soviet Yiddish version of this song. And then it was transformed into Shpil a tango mir of Yiddish in the movie, or for the movie Freylekhe kaptsonim, but it was actually excised from the movie and never made an appearance in there. And this is the text you might already know. So let us listen to the most famous version of the song, and this is the last that we are going to hear today. Thank you.
I just want to thank Diane for inviting us to participate in this program. It's quite a full circle for me personally, as I'm looking at a page from my mother's last book, Songs of Generation, which she compiled while working here, of course. And I'm just going to read the introduction that she wrote about this particular song, which of course mentions much of the information that we just heard. She, of course, gives credit to the Soviet Yiddish poet Yosef Kotliar, who wrote the words. And she writes, Moshe Elbaum, columnist, wrote in the Yiddish Forward on June 26, 1968, how he co-authored the words to Henech Kon's melody for the film The Freylekhe Kaptsonim in Warsaw, 1938, starring the actors Jigan and Schumacher. Later, the song was excised from the film, as we heard, but the original words were Shpil Tango of Yiddish, as also in Chassidish and the Yiddish. And then, Vergessen soll mit Zores hat Sinn, we should forget about our troubles. When he was in Vladivostok during the war, Elbaum gave the song to a Jewish singer from Russia. Years later, at a reception for the chief rabbi of Moscow, Rabbi Judah Leib Levin in New York in 1968, he was surprised to hear Cantor Stiskin from Russia sing the following version, Shpil, Shpil, Klezmer, Shpil, wie nur ein befreiter Mensch fühlt, play like only a freed person can feel. Singt mir das flammig große Lied, wie singt bloß a sowjetische Yid. Sing me the great fiery song as only a Soviet Jew can sing. And the song was adapted, as we heard, for during the Holocaust, Shpil mir Tango is from Platim, from the survivors. And later, she just gives a little bit more information. The song was sung in the Broadway play The Wall. And Michael Alpert informed my parents that he heard the tune without the refrain as a Hasidic piece, the Yismachu B'Malchus, recorded on a 78 RPM by Klezmer Shloimke Beckerman, whom I know my friend Pete Sokolow in the audience would appreciate hearing, in the 20s. And he also heard the tune played by violinist Leon Schwartz and clarinetist Andy Statman. So here is a mashup, if you will, of several of the versions of this song.
Spiel je mir a lidele in Yiddish, der wecken soll es Fried und nicht kein Yiddish, als alle groß und klein sollen kennen und verstehen, von Meul zu Meul das lidele soll gehen. A lidele und sifzen und ein Trären, spiel also ja alle sollen hören, als alle sollen sehen, ich leb und singen kann, schöner noch und besser wie gewinn. Spiel mir a Tango is auf Yiddish, soll sei misnagdish oder chsidish, als die Paupers allein soll keiner euch verstehen, und Tage hat Tänze allein. Spielt, spielt, klezmerlich spielt, wie Yiddish Herz begt und fühlt. Klopp, klopp, Beuke geschwind, vergessen soll man alles verziehen. Spiel, spiel, klezmerlich spielt, wie doch was ich mir und was ich will. Spiel, spiel, spiel a lidele vor mir, spiel a lidele mit Herz und mit Gefühl. Spiel je mir a lidele von Schulem, soll schon sein Schulem nicht kein Cholem. Als Völker groß und klein sollen kennen das verstehen, an Krieg und an Milchames ist begehen. wir singen's lidele zusammen, wie guter Freund, wie Kinder von ein Mammen. Mein einziger Verlag soll klingen frei und frag, in allem Menschgesang euch mein Gesang. Spiel, Spiel, Klesmittel, Spiel, weiß auch, was ich will oder was ich will. Spiel, 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 lidele vor mir, Spiel, lidele mit Herz und mit Gefühl. Spiel, Spiel, Klesmittel, Spiel, weiß doch, was ich will oder was ich will. Spiel, 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 lidele vor mir, Spiel, lidele mit Herz und mit Gefühl.
We will have questions outside, but before we depart, there were two things I forgot to say at the beginning, so I'll say them now, which is much thanks to the Jewish Music Forum for helping to co-sponsor this event, and I am Jonathan Brent, for those of you who don't know, Executive Director of the YIVO Institute. Thank you for coming.